On this episode of the Barricade Guard Show, I'm excited to be joined by my friend Dennis G to have a friendly debate on whether a carnivore or a plant-based diet is better for human flourishing. Dennis and I met at the Catholic Creator Conference in Steubenville a couple of months ago and discovered that we are both passionate about health and nutrition, so we thought it would be fun and hopefully edifying for those watching to discuss some of the pros and cons of eating a carnivore or a plant-based diet, or possibly something in between. Dennis is a Byzantine Catholic with a master's in theology and Christian ministry from Franciscan University in Steubenville. He is a former instructor at Franciscan University and Chesterton Academy, and is the co-founder of the East to West Theology YouTube channel, as well as his personal channel. Dennis currently works in hazmat operations, and today we're going to find out if he can convince me to ditch my green smoothies and go back to hot wings. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that Dennis and I are both Catholic. He is Eastern and I am Western. And so our faith informs a desire to want to honor the gift of health and tend to our physical bodily temples. But we are not claiming that Catholicism has a dogmatic position on specific diets, or that specific foods are immoral to eat. So in our discussion today, each of us might make a case to focus on certain foods and limit others, but I don't think either of us are trying to insist on a doctrinal adherence to our position. All right, so to start with, Dennis, would you like to share with us a little bit about your health journey and kind of your nutritional approach and what your journey has been like so far?
Yes. Hi, John. Good to be joined by you on your show. And my health journey has been quite an interesting one. I should say that I started off really just eating a normal omnivore diet where, I'm trying to follow the food pyramid. But then I started to grow closer to my Byzantine Catholic faith, which requires to go vegan several times a year for a lengthy period of times. Though, to be fair, technically those who are more extreme in their approach to that tradition would actually not even eat at all, or maybe just go on a bread and water fast. But for most people, it would be vegan. And so that was difficult at first for me. But yeah, doing that for 40 days here, or whether it's a smaller fasting period of 2 weeks. That was something where I started to become more acclimated to the vegan way of eating, right? And I enjoyed it. I love plant foods. I really have grown to appreciate, the different benefits that they do give. And I think that I can see why many people go that route. And in fact, I was leaning that way because of the Byzantine tradition of fasting. I started to simply eat more a vegan lifestyle, just outside of the fasting period as well, right? So instead of using, cow's milk, I would keep using almond milk, right, for example. And so I did notice that at one point, I did notice there was, maybe some health issues we don't have to get into necessarily, but I did notice a change there, a minor change, obviously, because I was getting rid of all animal products. But again, there was, pros and cons, and I think that's kind of what we're going to see here in discussing this today. But just recently, I started the carnivore diet to try to limit or maybe get rid of my psoriasis, right, which is an autoimmune disease. And I think that it takes 3 to 6 months. I've only been doing it for about a month now, and I do like the results so far. But to be fair, it's only been a month, and I know that a lot of the carnivore doctors, they do recommend 3 to 6 months. So with that being said, we still got some time to see what happens. But I did notice, obviously a change in my body, microbiome, my gut, and that was just a couple of days worth. Really, it's it has changed, but it's also stabilized as well. And there was a fluctuation with energy levels. One day I would be high energy, next day I'd be low energy, and that's just because the body is trying to transition from using glucose as energy to now your liver is using fat to turn into glucose for your body for energy, as it's a high fat, high protein diet. So that's just been in a nutshell kind of where I've gone so far. As I've also limited microplastics as well, and that's a huge part of health. I think that we both agree on, getting rid of plastic water bottles, and stop using plastic containers. I've turned to glass, right? I bought the Clearly water filter. I'm not getting paid by them. It's just that they're ranked number one, and they get rid of fluoride as well as 300 plus other contaminants in the water. And of course, you don't have the microplastic problem then, which is endocrine disruptor, et cetera. So with all that being said, I've definitely transitioned the past couple of years, maybe a few years, through this journey of, up and down, and trying to figure out what's best for my health and longevity for me and my family. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about that. So, a couple questions that come to mind as I was hearing you, kind of unpack some of that journey. So, with the carnivore diet that you're trying now, is it strict, only beef, or is it a variety of meats, or do you have other things besides meat still mixed in there? How are you approaching that at this point?
Yeah, sure. 95% grass-fed beef. So, though I do throw in there some goat meat. My wife loves goat meat. So, and then also fish on Fridays, because again, as a Byzantine Catholic, we have an obligation throughout the entire year to give up or give up meat on Friday. Fish is permitted. So either I can just go straight vegan or pescatarian on Friday. So therefore, yeah, yesterday I had just Atlantic salmon, and then I did have butter as well, grass fed butter, Kerrygold. But yeah, that's pretty much been it. Again, sometimes I'll have chicken, but otherwise that's it. Just water and red meat, primarily.
Okay. And then, so when you were doing closer to a vegan diet before,
Mhm.
was that, when you were thinking about how you kind of designed that diet, was that kind of informed by any particular school of thought as far as, what the vegan approach was? Because sometimes we'll joke in the health world that you can eat potato chips, Swedish fish, and soda and be eating a vegan diet, but we'd both agree that that's probably not going to produce very good health results. And I'm sure you weren't eating like that, but I was just curious. Was there a certain, certain approach you were taking, a certain doctor, or certain guidelines you were using to help design that vegan diet, or was it just kind of approaching it more from the religious perspective of avoiding animal products, or kind of how did you work through that at that point?
Yeah, John, I've always tried to eat healthily. That doesn't mean that I was perfect at everything I ate. I did eat potato chips and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I tried to have whole vegan food, avocado, try to find my protein in peanut butter. And like I said, switching to almond milk. I had my Garden of Life, right, protein powder, which I still have a little bit left of, and I'm still planning on using. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of that, but I mean, there are so many different components inside that Garden of Life protein powder. It's obviously plant based, and yeah, so I definitely tried to, um, just focus on getting all my proteins as well as all my vitamins and nutrients. And I did take a multivitamin as well. I'm the kind of person that tends to be more cautious. I would rather take too many vitamins than too little. But my blood work's always come up pretty well, and except for my vitamin D, because I live up here, further north than you, right, in the great state of New York, and we receive less sunlight. But I have been taking, at least 2,000 IU's a day previously, vitamin D, and I just received my blood work, and it went up to normal. Before it was very low. So that was the only thing that I was deficient in. But again, that could have been a contributor to when I was doing the vegan diet for those 2 years, pretty seriously. Not strictly for 2 years, but during that period of time, and my vitamin D levels were very low. but since then I've been taking the supplement, and it's gone up to relatively normal.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the probably many common grounds that we have. I do supplement as well. If for no other reason, just to kind of fill any gaps that might be there that maybe I'm hopeful I'm getting through the nutrition, but just in case I'm not, just to kind of cover my bases. But yeah, vitamin D, and then for somebody eating a plant-based diet, vitamin B12 is important as well to keep in mind.
Mhm.
So that's one of some of the things that I try to keep in mind there. But yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you because I listen to Dr. Joel Furman as you do. I've listened to him, and I was just wondering what your approach was to the vegan diet in regards to, or the Nutritarian diet, right? To receive all of your vitamins and minerals from that diet. But then, of course, as we're going to discuss here, we know that humans cannot receive all of their essential vitamins and minerals and proteins from a strictly vegan diet. So you need the supplement. So I'm wondering, for one, how's your diet looking now, and what are the supplements you're using?
Yeah. So, it's been a journey for me as well. I mean, if I think back before I was, where I'm at right now, I grew up eating a very standard American diet, very typical common things that you'd think of the, the average American type eating. Um, and then at some point post college, I went through a phase where I was trying to clean up a little bit and get back to the gym, try to reestablish some health. But at that point, my approach to health was much more along the lines of like, okay, I want to eat lean meat and vegetables, and get the whole grain pasta instead of the white pasta, and eat the raisin bran instead of the cinnamon toast crunch. That kind of like approach to health kind of thing. So better than what I was doing before, but not fantastic. um, and so it was through a trainer at our local YMCA that kind of introduced me to the idea of, he kind of little by little started gradually saying, well, why don't you try going without, maybe
Mm,
some dairy milk first, and, try taking this out and trying this in. And so, and then eventually he said, why don't you check out, Dr. Joel Furman and some of his approach to nutrition. So it is probably worth mentioning that, yeah, my approach to being, vegan, if you want to say that, a lot of times I will just tell people, like, they'll say, oh, are you vegan? And I'll say, well, for all intents and
plant-based.
purposes, basically, it's easier. Most people understand that better than Nutritarian.
Right.
But yeah, my approach to nutrition is kind of what Dr. Joel Furman coined as the Nutritarian approach, which is
Hmm.
saying, I'm not primarily focused on what I'm avoiding. I do avoid certain things just from a health standpoint because I say, okay, like I was joking about before, soda, Swedish fish, they're not going to optimize my health. So I'm going to avoid those, but not because I
Right.
think I have a necessarily a moral obligation because they're intrinsically evil or anything like that, but just because I'm saying, okay, I only have so much food I'm going to comfortably consume in a day, and I want to be comfortably consuming the things that are going to optimize my health. So the Nutritarian approach basically says, the foods that have the highest micronutrient per calorie density are the ones that are going to give us the best overall health and longevity. And so we're looking at whole plant foods, a lot of things like nuts, seeds, beans, greens, onions, mushrooms, berries,
He, he
especially
he
darker
calls
berries.
it the gene bomb,
G
right? The G
bombs.
bomb.
Yep, you got it right there. Very good. Yep,
Yeah.
the G bombs. So those are the things I kind of primarily focus on. I mean, I kind of talk about some of this. I have a different video on my channel that goes into some of my favorite, meals and stuff like that. But kind of my two staples that I eat most often, and then I fill in with other meals as well. But the two kind of ones are my breakfast oatmeal smoothie that has steel cut oatmeal, almonds, walnuts, flax seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, some silent cinnamon, and a little bit of banana. And so that's kind of like my standard, typical go-to breakfast. And then for dinner is commonly a green smoothie where I'll pack the Vitamix pitcher 2/3 of the way full with some kind of greens, whether it's spinach, kale, collards, chard, something like that, avocado, flax seeds, chia seeds, and then some sort of mixture of dark berries. Um, and so that's kind of like the to go to things. And then for the other, I might have a bean and rice soup or something for lunch or something like that. So so I try to kind of, as much as I can, hit all of those bases, to try to give myself the best chance I can of getting all those vitamins and minerals and all those essential things from the foods if I can. So I'm trying to get, eat the beans with the rice to get as much protein and different amino acid combinations there as I can, a variety of those things, and then a variety of those other plant foods, to get as much as I can naturally, and then the supplements there to kind of fill the gaps if there's something that's, maybe the soil wasn't as nutritious as I would hope it would be when some of those plants were growing, and so maybe I didn't get the maximum amount of nutritional value from some of those things. So
Right, right. No, I'm you're making my mouth water from the previous month. But, no, me and my wife would make those same kind of smoothies as well, pretty regularly. And I would, I know I still got to talk about the carnivore side, but again, I'm on this journey, so I think we're just speaking about health primarily here. So yeah, my shake included very similar ingredient that yours did, but I'd have that base. Originally, I would use milk, like cow's milk, but then I switched to almond milk, and in fact, we started making our own almond milk. We had actually, yeah, because my wife's father and uncle came up, with the recipe, and it's, instead of having like a 10% base of almonds and then the rest water, like most of almond milk is in the store, it actually 100% almond with figs inside, and so it was just amazing difference. I mean, you can taste it. The richness of it was amazing. And so I was a huge fan of that. So we were doing that for a little while. And so that was the base. I would have the steel cut oats, and I would, have 2 bananas in there, maybe half a cup of mixed berries. So blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. And then I would put maybe a tablespoon or two of raw honey, local honey. I'm a big fan of local honey. And yeah, and then add the Garden of Life protein powder, which includes, just a whole slew of things. The audience could look that up. It's pretty popular, but it includes a lot of those flat, the seeds, organic, like pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, brown sugar. I'm sorry, brown rice flour, and other important components. Obviously peas for the protein. So yeah, that was that's what I pretty much drank every single day. And sometimes I'd even drink that for dinner. If like things were before I got married, and mostly before I got married, but after I got married, just once in a while. But yeah, that was my lunch to go. A lot of days as well for work. So that, and my wife would make her green smoothies as well. Packed with kale and just that Garden of Life again, and different mixed berries. So yeah, very good.
it's funny, just to mention real quickly. I was my some of my children were, asking me questions about, when we were going to have this discussion, and I was joking with them about, well, you never know. We'll see if Dennis convinces me to go back to eating hot wings. And I said, well, maybe we'll compromise. Since we're doing smoothies now, if he convinces me to go to hot wings, we'll make hot wing smoothies. We'll compromise. They weren't too excited about that idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, just very quickly, my great uncle is 90. He's super healthy. Obviously, he's 90. He's still walking around, but he has the omnivore diet, though he's heavy on the vegetables and fruits. But he does eat a lot of red meat, a lot of lamb meat and beef. And what's funny though is at one point, he was getting the rest of his teeth out and to prepare for his dentures, and he ended up blending all his food. So whatever he made, it was meat, with beets, right? He would put red, beets in there, and he would just blend everything and drink it.
So he would
He
actually
literally,
he would actually eat blended meat, and he would eat that.
I know it sounds weird, but
Okay.
this is that you just brought that up, so it's funny. But that's what he would do, and he did that for a long time actually, because he, even when he got his teeth, he just liked it better. I don't know. I mean, don't ask me.
Yeah, he was
But
used to it, and that's what he wanted to do. Yeah, yeah.
his vitals are perfect. So
Well, so maybe
yeah,
as we kind of transition into a little bit talking about some of those distinctives between the carnivore and the plant-based side, I was thinking some of the common ground we have. We already mentioned a little bit. So I'm guessing both of us would say, well, if we're going to talk about which diet is best for human flourishing, we'd probably both agree that if somebody was going to do one of these or the other, we're talking about kind of the best version of each. So like from the vegan standpoint, something like, I would think something like that Nutritarian approach, not just like a junk food vegan approach.
Mhm.
Um, and so from your standpoint with the carnivore diet, I was joking about hot wings, but I'm guessing hot wings probably aren't on the list of what the true carnivore diet for health is probably supposed to include. So what would I kind of describe what that Nutritarian approach would be. Um, you know, what would you describe as kind of the optimal carnivore diet if someone was really going to try to do that for optimal human flourishing?
Sure, sure. So very quickly, I would say that being from Buffalo, you know that buffalo wings are from Buffalo. That's why they're called buffalo wings, not because they come from an animal.
I was
Buffalo,
assuming I wasn't eating the wing of the buffalo. Yeah.
right? That we see that in the commercials. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, obviously wings are pretty popular here, as being the original wing. But yeah, no, that wouldn't be number one. So there's a few factors here. When we look at the data, we see that a lot of the observational research, right, the epidemiology on eating red meat includes the healthy user bias and the unhealthy user bias. So for many years, when they've been doing these studies, they've been examining people that are either vegan or vegetarian, and then those that include meat in their diet, and in America at least. And so there's going to be a few key components here because, of course, a healthy user bias is those who usually tend towards veganism and vegetarianism are usually living a healthy lifestyle. They exercise, which is essential, right? And so they include these healthy whole foods. They don't eat junk food usually, and so you're going to end up living better than someone that's eating the standard American diet, which is junk. Um, and so when they include people eating red meat or just meat in general, they don't they don't factor in the fact that they're eating junk food along with it, right? And they're smoking and they don't exercise. So for a long time, a lot of these epidemiology studies, these observational studies, they didn't separate those who would just eat meat, right, and then compare it to those who would just eat vegan. No, they don't do that. But we do look in, again, other Asian countries, and I think you've heard this on the debate that you sent me, where a lot of the Asian countries that include meat. In fact, in Okinawa, right, one of the quote unquote blue zones, there's not one vegetarian amongst the centenarians, but only those who included meat in their diet have lived past 100 in Okinawa. And so in East Asia, those who eat meat, we see an actual increase in their health, right? And there, we can parse out some of those details if you want, maybe on a part two. But the point of the matter is, what's the key difference here is um, the junk food aspect of it, right? And primarily the seed oils, I think you and I agree that the high processed seed oils, right, like canola oil, vegetable oils, extremely bad. I mean, I have a chart. I'm not going to screen share it, but basically the chart shows that between red meat, between all these other foods, none of them compare to obesity like vegetable oils. I mean, there's just no comparison. The chart just goes straight up. Those who consume vegetable oils, it leads to obesity and chronic diseases because they include a high amount of toxins that the body is not made to receive or digest, right? And our evolutionary background is not that quick that it could just catch up to, our standard American diet from the past 50 years, right? You need hundreds, if not thousands, of years of evolutionary development for our body to even consider different types of foods like these. So very harmful. So most people eat meat with vegetable oils, right? Even if you go to Applebee's, right, and you order a steak, it's going to be cooked in soybean oil or high processed canola oil or whatever it may be. And that's one of the key issues as well. And of course, not having grass fed animals, right? This is very, very important because 100% grass fed, grass finished, regenerative uh, cows, right? They're eating grass. Grass is jam packed with nutrients. I mean, it's going to be more than anything that you put inside your shake or my shake from before. but our bodies aren't designed to digest grass, right? But cows are. So when they consume grass their whole life, right, that becomes part of them. You are what you eat. And so for us humans, when we eat grass-fed cows, we're receiving a ton of macronutrients, but thousands of micronutrients that we don't even have names for all of them yet. I mean, and these are essential, right, for human flourishing and development. And so to answer your question, I would say number one is cut out all these seed oils, right? I mean, if you want to go extra virgin olive oil, I do support that because there are so many health benefits that if you buy, the best kind, right? Which I think California based are very good, Evo. But but otherwise, the number one thing would be grass fed beef, right? And you want to include a lot of fat. So carnivore diet, especially trying to get rid of autoimmune disease, you want to have a high fat. It's going to be 60 to 70% fat based, and then maybe about 30% protein. Again, there are people on this diet that include fruits, right, at a lower level, or vegetables at a lower level, like kind of like a keto diet or paleo diet. But if you want to go strict carnivore, that would be number one. You just want to primarily consume beef, and then of course you can throw in lamb or goat, or I would say fish as well. It's high in vitamin D3, which is essential. If you're not getting it from the sun, you can find it in Atlantic salmon. Wild caught has more vitamin D, I believe, than the farm raised. And yeah, you want to stay away from like white bread. White bread's very bad for you. So I mean, when people eat meat, a lot of them eat it with white bread. I mean, you're basically cutting out burgers. You're just eating the meat, right? And then so I think that would be number one. A lot of people do include dairy products as well. I mean, maybe some go raw milk instead of pasteurized milk. And there's some health benefits to that. I personally have not gone that route.
So for a while now, thinking about what the recommendations have been over the past couple of decades, you hear a lot about chicken and turkey as potentially healthier options for meat as opposed to red meat or beef. So maybe just a quick comment for the audience as far as why beef or red meat is a healthier choice than chicken or turkey from your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, there's different ways I can answer that. One, I would say evolutionary. We for 2.5 million years, humans have eaten red meat. They hunted, these giant extinct animals that no longer exist, and that was our primary source of nutrients. So I believe that our bodies are literally designed for that. So every species has its specific diet, and I do believe that it's just science. It's inside of our brain. Even when they examine our brain, that when you put like a steak in front of a man, right? There's a certain neuron that goes off inside of your brain because we're literally designed for that. Our teeth are designed for chewing meat, and that's actually what made us Homo sapien sapien. Is that protein, specific proteins inside the red meat, right? Like carnitine and creatine. I mean, there's a whole list of them. Vitamin K2 that's only found inside red meat. And again, there's a slew of them, and many of them we don't even know all their names yet because we're just discovering them now. But you don't find that inside white meat, and it's also more lean. Again, we promote a high fat because our brains are literally made up of 20-30% cholesterol. Our bodies need cholesterol, right, from animals, and again, this is how we became Homo sapien sapien. I mean, you can see the gradual increase in our skull shape over the over our evolutionary tract, but then it skyrocketed during the Ice Age when all we had to eat was meat, and so for all that period of time, right, this is why humans, right, primarily went in that direction. And of course, we did include fruit when the seasons came about. And of course, in recent times, we could talk about that later. But obviously, the Earth is a lot warmer than it was at the beginning of that great ice age. So we have a lot more access to fruits and vegetables and things like that. But we have to look at our digestive tract, right? Like for example, um, you know, what's best for us, right? And without going too deep into that right now, I think that the high fat, right, more than the high protein, because if you just include, let's say, lean meat, you're going to include maybe 70 to 30% protein to fat ratio, which is actually pretty bad, I would say, because it can lead to protein toxicity, right? So your body needs that fat, right, to burn and to convert into glucose, right? As I mentioned earlier in this episode here, that you're basically all that sugar that you usually eat in your diet or from the carbs, right, that your body uses. It's now just straight fat that it's using to convert, right, in the ketosis process. And I think that it's really interesting because, again, after 3 days of doing that, your body already starts to convert into that way of living, and that just shows me that our bodies are literally designed for that. Whether or not you want to argue it's just seasonal, right? We can argue maybe it's just a seasonal thing or a lifelong thing, but we do know that looking at all the different cultures around the world, they all primarily focus on the red meat instead of the white meat. So we look at the Maasai in Africa, right? They live through their 70s, 80s, 90s, and very healthy, no chronic diseases. And they literally eat red meat almost every single day. And they run for 10 hours a day hunting, right? There's only maybe several thousand hunters left in this world, wild humans, if you will. And, we can see that in South America, the Inuit, right? Or the formerly called the Eskimos up in the northern regions. They, again, primarily eat meat, and a lot of times they eat it raw, which is why they're not always in ketosis, because raw meat does actually contain carbohydrates. So, but yeah, the focus is the red meat, and that's because of all the micro and macronutrients that are included in it that you don't really find in the white meat per se, though it's not bad to eat. That would just be the reason why, in a nutshell. I'd like to expound more, but
Yeah, well, I'm sure we can unpack even more if we do a part two discussion. So maybe just tying in for a second, because the evolutionary process is an interesting aspect of the discussion, and kind of looping back in our faith element of this as well. You know, obviously, Genesis might not be a strict, literal, scientific approach of creation, but just kind of thinking even from a principle perspective, if someone were to say, well, it seems like in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were primarily eating plants and not hunting and eating a carnivore diet in the Garden of Eden. What would your be response be to that, or your take on that? If you're thinking that early Homo sapiens were designed to be carnivores, how do those things mesh together?
yeah, it's a great question. There is a lot of debate on this. Actually, when I was living that vegan lifestyle, for those seasonal times and beyond, my friend was starting to learn how to hunt, and I was actually promoting, that same narrative. I'm like, well, if we go back to the Garden of Eden, we see this, but and then he kind of switched over, to that side, and but anyway, it was funny how that worked. But I don't believe. Again, I taught biblical theology at Franciscan. Um, if we actually look at the Catechism, we see in the Catechism, it actually states that Genesis 1 through 11 does not have to be read literalistically, of course, and it's a lot of it is symbolic. A lot of it is story. We have to believe certain aspects of it that were literal. Like there were first, our first parents existed. There was original sin. They were in a garden, so to speak, like paradise. But there are some passages, I don't have them up right now, but there's some passages that allude to the fact that no, we actually did eat meat in the garden as well. And we actually see, I don't know if you listen to Catholic Answers at all, but I love Jimmy Akin and his Mysterious World, he's the senior apologist at Catholic Answers. And it's actually funny. I'd like to give a little story at the end of this about meeting you and then how I actually end up going carnivore. And that was all from that same weekend. It was all from that same weekend.
I failed.
No, not you. Not, it wasn't your fault, actually. Actually, you kind of prevented me from doing that, but it was the research I did afterward. Um, but anyway, we'll get to that in a moment, maybe. But I would just say that, yeah, Genesis 1 through 11 does not have to be read that way. But even so, there is evidence that there was already death, in the garden. In fact, let's just talk about this. Plants are living, right? They're alive. And when you bite into an apple or an orange or a mango, you're killing those cells, really. And so there is death. I mean, when you uproot a plant, right? When you uproot it, we know botanically now that there's actually these very, very quiet screams from the plants. They're living, right? They're actually trying to survive like we are. They're just a lower life form. And so we are killing things to exist, whether or not we're killing something that's closer to us in the evolutionary, or I should say maybe the what's that called? The cycle of, I'm forgetting the name of it, but basically it's the hierarchy of the food chain, right? So the food chain. But again, when you look at it, you see that, let's say, again, even in the aquatic realm, you see like a shark will eat a fish, that fish eats another fish, and that fish, down the line eats a fish that eats algae, right? So it's just this progression. And we see that the more intelligent, right, life forms that exist are eating meat, right? They're eating the other animals, right? That eventually eat the lower life forms of plants. So for us being apex predators, is the Tel Aviv study that came out recently, shows that humans were, again, apex predators for millions of years. Again, tying it in with Genesis, I think it works. But again, I do believe, and this is why I do like Dr. Paul Saladino, because he has gone from vegan, right? He was strict vegan to strict carnivore. Now he's considered himself animal based, where he has pretty much an equal amount of animal food and plant foods, but primarily fruit, because he believes that, there's the phytoelectins, toxins, right? The oxalates inside vegetables that mess with the human body and the human gut. Okay, so he sticks with fruit that he believes is best organic fruit, and he includes 250 grams a day. And he does that because he knows that at some point in our recent development as humans, right, Homo sapiens sapien, we had a bunch of fruit around us, right, at that point, because the earth was already warming up and people were living near the equator again. And these giant mammoths of animals that existed on the planet are now extinct. So that did become part of it. And so we can argue, did Adam and Eve exist at that point, right, where they had an abundance of everything? And I think that would make sense. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so some of the information that I've seen as I've, read or watched different things suggests that possibly, some of those things, like you mentioned, the oxalates, that maybe some of the issues people have with those is an unhealthy microgut biome. And so maybe, if that is resolved, then some of those other things might not be issues for those people, and so, maybe something like the carnivore diet, especially if someone is really sticking to just strictly beef or red meat, that maybe it's functioning kind of like an elimination diet. And so if there's something in their diet that's causing some sort of reaction, or some sort of allergic reaction or whatever, that maybe doing that does yield short-term health benefits in one regard or another. And so that, I guess, maybe kind of the question maybe then becomes, okay, you know we've gone through these evolutionary cycles, getting rid of some things out of a diet for somebody who maybe has been eating an unhealthy diet for a number of years, and they've developed some sort of either allergic reaction or autoimmune disease or inflammatory bowel disease, whatever it might be. Um, you know, once we get them back to a healthy point, what is then, like, if we say, okay, now that we kind of live in modern society, and we have refrigeration methods, we're apex predators, we have access, most of us have access to supplements if we want them. if we really can design at this point and say what is the optimal diet for human flourishing, for health and longevity into the future, because I think from my standpoint, that's kind of what I'm trying to aim towards and say, okay, what's going to give me the best chance of living disease free, no chronic diseases, no reduce all cause mortality, and just have a nice long healthy natural life where we're honoring the gifts of our body that God's given us and being
Mhm.
able to enjoy the time with our family and friends and just
Oh, yeah.
make the best use of that time. So if we're trying to design that kind of optimal health that optimal diet, and
Mhm.
we're thinking in terms of everything we have available to us nowadays, you know, I guess maybe that's where we can start talking about, do we think that's a carnivore diet, or do we have the ability to design something better than a carnivore diet? It might not just be, we might need a little bit more specificity than just saying just go ahead and eat any plant you want, because depending on your age and what's going on with your hormones and what your particular health goals or challenges are, some people, an athlete who's using lots of burning lots of calories each day, they might need some more nuts and seeds than somebody who is older and not as active. And if someone's trying to lose weight, they're going to need less of those nuts and seeds, or less less
Mhm.
healthy fats, less avocado, than somebody who is you know trying to gain weight or build muscle. But if we have the ability to say, okay, we can tailor a healthy plant-based diet with a small amount of appropriate supplements, um, do we think the evidence leads to saying that that can or produce better long-term health outcomes than a carnivore diet? Or do we think a carnivore diet can still produce better long-term health outcomes than a properly designed plant-based diet?
Right. And I think that, we maybe have, unfortunately, only about 5 more minutes here based on our schedules, but this is definitely going to have to be a part two. But I would like to just chime in a little bit. Maybe this could be like the segue for part two. But yeah, and then, I can let you, obviously conclude. But to answer your question that you're asking, I think it's complex, and I'm open minded person on this because, as you know, I've had this journey, and I want what you want. I have the full intention of what you have. I want to live as long as I can, 120, and be there for my family, and not just maybe deteriorating. Right? I want to be vital and present mentally. So again, this would definitely have to be a part two, but I would just say that the evidence, the epidemiology is on your side, right? You have 20, 30, 40,000 studies on your side. And we have several studies, recent ones from people that are just starting this carnivore diet within the past 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And there's a guy I've listened to that's been doing it for 40 years. He was with Dr. Anthony Chafee on his channel, and he looks great, right? He's been doing just basically meat for 40 years, and he's great, right? So I'm just wondering, when we look at the data, the recent data, we know that Ansel Keys, who coined, I believe he's the one that coined the whole Mediterranean diet, and the blue zones, right? No, he's not the one that coined the blue zones. That was Dan. I forget his last name, but first name is Dan. But either way, we know that these were cherry picked, and we know that the data was skewed in favor of toward plant foods, away from animal foods. And we know for an absolute fact that the data shows in the 1950s and 60s, three Harvard professors during Ansel Keys' time were paid off by the big sugar company and grain companies, because America had an excess amount of that, and they needed to sell to the rest of the world. And I know that for a fact, because right here in Buffalo, we had giant grain mills. Right there now, they're vacant, more or less, being used for other things. But we're the capital of America for grain, and we still do produce a lot of the cereals here. You smell it when you drive through the city. You smell like Cheerios and stuff like that in the air, which is nice. But but yeah, so those paid. I mean, in modern day money, they paid the one Harvard professor $50,000, right, to skew the whole pyramid scheme, that I call it, because they're putting grain as number one. You need like 8 servings of this, and then divide it up. that was totally false. And they substituted cholesterol from animals and fat to say, oh, sugar is nebulous. You can substitute the sugar for this. Again, they were paid off by the grain company. We know this from several years ago. The data came out, and it's just, only a few people have been speaking about it, but it's very clear cut. And a lot of the carnivore doctors are definitely spewing that data out for everyone to see. And maybe next time I can bring that up, but that's something I want to say when we're looking at long-term data. Do we trust that data? And I don't know if I do. And that's a problem, because when I look at the evolutionary scale, which again, as Catholics, you can or cannot believe in that. But either way, what you cannot deny is how our teeth are shaped, how our guts are shaped. Our guts are shaped different from primates who do eat a lot of plant foods, right? But our guts are not shaped that way. In fact, the appendix that we barely use, that was used for digesting plants and fiber. But now you can take that out and you can be fine. You can get a surgery done with your appendix and you'll be fine, because evolutionarily, I believe, through God's guidance, it became obsolete because we were eating meat for so long. And we look at different tribes again throughout the world that strictly ate meat, and then when they switched to a normal diet, a Western diet, they started becoming sick, right? And in Australia, we see this, in Africa, in South America, and we see that even the human skeletons, anthropologically, we see that we were taller, bigger heads. The Native Americans, who basically ate buffalo meat, red meat, deer meat all the time, they were, as I believe this data, that they were super tall. They're averaging 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and their heads were huge to fit their big brains, right? Because all the specific proteins that you can only find in animal meat helped, again, make us human, as we know, and are vital for us to not just survive, but thrive. And so this is where I'm definitely questioning the narrative of, is plant-based the way, or is animal-based the way? So right now, where I stand is, I do believe that there's a lot of evidence for fruits and honey. Again, I'm on Dr. Paul Saladino's side. I think that including fruits is great, maybe not for everybody. And I think that depends on where you are, because if you're a Northern European, and maybe better, as Dr. Ken Berry states, that you're designed for the past 40,000 years, at least, being a Northern European, you're designed to have more meat than fruit all year, or vegetables. Because if you want to live naturally, and you've been living in Scandinavia for 40,000 years, you only receive fruit in the spring, maybe a little bit in the fall, and then you have vegetables in the fall, right? Which you have also fruit there as well, like squash and things like that. But but the rest of the year, you have to survive on meat, and so you've done that for how long? And so we see even a little story. I'll end it here because I know we're past the time. But a little story is, Dr. Anthony Chaffee said this about how the emperor or king of Ethiopia met with the king of Persia, and they were speaking back and forth to each other, and they're trying to figure out more about their culture and way of living. And the king of Ethiopia asked the king of Persia, how long do your people live? He said, 60, 70, 80 years, which is pretty decent. But the king of Ethiopia said, we live to up to 100, 110, 120. And he said, it must be because what you're eating. And they told him they eat primarily, agriculturally, right? Whereas in Ethiopia, they boiled their cattle and things like that. And he made a joke. He says, because you eat dirt, right? That's why you're not living to 120 like we are. But anyway, that's just a funny little story there that's recorded. But I think that even looking at the Mongolians and other tribes that only lived off meat, that they were stronger, and they did live a long time. Of course, you have to square the the mortality, right? Because a lot of people died young as children, right? The infant mortality was, so that kind of curves it curves the age, right? When you're looking at these tribal people, the average is going to be lower because of how many people die as children. So when you take that out of the picture and just live according to how the Western, mortality rate is with children, we would see that it's actually much higher and definitely rivals our own rate, but they're also not dealing with these chronic diseases that we have today that, again, a lot of the carnivore doctors would say is based on the toxins from plants. As you mentioned, there are some and that people got to be aware of. But again, I'm open-minded and I want to continue this conversation. And I guess the thing I want to reveal is that I am going to plan on going back to fruits and honey this period of time, maybe to try to live more naturally because, the harvest is here. And, I think, it's time for some carbohydrates. But I do want to limit it. I'm going to keep it low, keep it at maybe like a paleo level within 100 grams, 50 to 100 grams a day, just to try to see. I'm trying to get rid of my psoriasis. So I'm taking different steps. I did the 40-day vegan challenge, if you will, plus, and it didn't get rid of it. But again, maybe it was the type of foods I was eating still. And again, I'm open to that data.
Yeah, I was part of I was asking that question before too is I'd watched a couple of the debates that you sent me, the one between Dr. Vargas and Dr. Chaffee, and then also the one between Dr. Garth Davis and Dr. Sean Baker, and it seemed like that maybe unless I misunderstood them, that maybe they were kind of agreeing that the studies that are available, there's a little more evidence in those studies. Now we can question whether or not, like you said, is there some bias? Is there some issues with how those studies were conducted? But at least so far point towards better results longevity wise on a plant-based diet, and that maybe there aren't as many studies, at least not yet, on the carnivore side. I think Dr. Sean Baker was saying, he really wants to see those studies, and it's hard to get funding for them and things like that. So maybe one of the big takeaways here is that we need to push to say, okay, we need to get a whole bunch of twins at birth that we can put in like these like sterile places with no environmental toxins and raise one of them in like a super well designed nutritarian plant-based diet, and then a super good clean grass-fed carnivore diet, and follow them for 120 years and like have like the perfectly designed study, and we'll solve this debate once and for all. So maybe
That's it. Yeah. That'd be a great
situation.
interventional study. That's what we need. We need interventional studies because we don't really have any. And we do have some for the carnivore, but they're short term or relatively, long, and they're positive, right? I mean, you have Tel Aviv, you have Harvard, Oxford, and I have at least one of those studies up, but we can put those in the show notes for people to look at and look for both your studies for the Nutritarian and also for the carnivore. So we'll put an even amount up hopefully, and we'll see. But ultimately, you're right. People just have to be aware that there aren't any interventional studies like you just named, and that's because the funding isn't there. And you kind of question why. Why isn't it there? If they really care about people's health, wouldn't they want to just do this study, get it over with, so people can stop going, and eating meat? But they haven't done it, and it's because I really don't think that the companies are there. I mean, a lot of these studies are backed by big bucks and big corporations, and they make more money off plants. That's the point. You can produce 1 billion plants, right? For protein powder, for grains, for cereals, right? And you make way more money than you can. One cattle can literally feed you for 2 years, right? If you freeze the meat. So think about it. How much money are they going to make? And they're not in control of the cattle necessarily, right? There's independent farmers. So I do think it's a money game as well. That's why I'm very cautious, and it's tough. And I'm praying, for guidance, but ultimately, I think experimentation is good, and staying true to the blood work. And the LDL we'll have to get into next time, because I think that's a myth. I think LDL can be in the 200s, and you're actually healthy. Because again, our brains are made up of 20-30% cholesterol, our bodies, right? Those things are actually necessary. And LDL they're just transporters, right? For the cholesterol. They're kind of like the firemen at the scene of a fire. If there's like a heart issue, they're not the ones causing it, right? There's 120 different types of LDL, right? So you have to parse all those out, which ones are getting better. So that has to do with the saturated fat, the polyunsaturated, right? Fat. And so we have to really parse out which fats are good, which are bad. And these things haven't really been done, at least not in a meta-analysis. So
I want to be respectful of your time. So I know you have to head out here shortly, but yeah, I definitely appreciated our time together, and I think that's a good segue and a good teaser for our part two. So for the audience, stay tuned and be sure to like and subscribe. And Dennis will tell you here in a second how to connect with him and subscribe to him as well. And stay tuned so we can delve into some of these topics at a future date, and the things we've been talking about. Maybe also talk a little bit about fasting and the morality of different nutritional approaches, and how some of this squares with the different liturgical seasons in both the East and the West, and how the diets fit in with those things. So these will all be topics for part two, hopefully. So Dennis, if people want to connect with you and follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
for sure. Well, I'm on East to West Theology with co-host Kyle Dean, and we talk about Eastern and Western Catholicism in unison. And also my own personal channel, which is Cherubim Creations, such as one of the 9 choirs of angels, excuse me. And it's the second highest. So Cherubim Creations. And yeah, you could, tune in. Please like, subscribe, and share. My personal channel is just getting underway. So it's really just in the infancy stage. But I would like to be talking more about health and just other topics that I have a lot of study time on a lot of these topics. So I just want to, share what I have to offer to the general public. But yeah, and then East West Theology has been going on for a little while. We're going to be going on 2 years in January, so that'd be great. But yeah, and hopefully next time my camera will work, because this is just a laptop camera, and my 4K camera was giving me issues connecting, right? So hopefully when we have the part two, I'll look like you. But right now I think you win, because you have the clearer picture and you look healthier because of the vibrancy of the resolution.
It's obviously a plant-based diet makes my tech work better. That makes perfect sense. The logic's there. So
There you go.
But no, I appreciate you joining me today. I think this is a good conversation. I'm definitely looking forward to part two, and hopefully people will come back to hear that discussion as well. And I look forward to reconnecting with you soon. So thanks again, Dennis.
Thank you, John.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Pax Christi.
And for those watching, let me know in the comments below if you're going carnivore or plant-based, and if there are any other topics you'd like to see me bring guests on to discuss in the future. Also, if you found this video helpful, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might benefit from it as well. It really does help out me and the channel. And don't forget to follow the Barricade Guard on Facebook, X, and Instagram. The links are in the show notes below. And until next time, fortify your soul, body, and family.